in 1941 in a small village in Nazi-controlled Poland. A young man came home to discover that his father had died while he was at work. And what made his father's death exceedingly more unbearable was that several years earlier, both this young man's sister and mother had died. And as he held his father's dead body in his arms, he lamented, "I'm all alone. At 20, I've already lost all the people I've loved." One writer described it this way. He wrote, "Ripped out of the soil of his background, his life could no longer be what it used to be. He now began a journey to deeper communion with God. But it didn't come without tears, and it didn't come without what seems to have been a certain existential horror." You see, suffering can do that to us. We're jolted, kicked, prodded, and shoved into new realities that we never ever would have brought about on our own. We're forced to imagine a new future because the one that we were planning on is gone. And that young Polish man sitting on the floor with his dead father in his arms, he had his whole world collapse around him. Many of you sitting here right now know what that's like. To have your whole world collapse around you. Over the past few weeks, the number of people in our parish who have been going through incredibly painful experiences has been staggering. And so this evening I want to explore with you the idea of suffering and pain as part of the way in which we are transformed. Which I think is entirely relevant considering that we are a people who follow a man that actually marched towards his own crucifixion. Who showed us that there is something inside of pain that can profoundly change us. Now normally we want to hide from pain. We want to avoid pain at all costs because we're scared of it. We're scared of the truth that pain can reveal. In fact, I think the most important truths that we can learn in life come as a direct result of pain. That pain and truth are in many ways, they're bound together. And yet, because we want to avoid pain, what we do is we lie to ourselves. And that causes all kinds of problems. So first, I want to talk about the pain that we avoid, and then I'll talk about the pain that we face. Now, if you would say to me, "I'm really happy," I'd be like, "Great, you're really happy." But if you tell me 5 times during a single conversation that you're really happy, I'm going to be thinking, "No, you're actually really depressed." Because why would you tell me 5 times that you're really happy unless you weren't? And you know, you're probably not even trying to convince me that you're happy. You're actually just trying to convince yourself. Because your obsessiveness betrays that there's something deeper going on. Like, for example, imagine a marriage where a couple is experiencing bitterness, anger, and resentment. But they don't ever bring it up. Well, that's a problem. Because in a marriage, there are things that are acceptable. You know, things like we should cherish each other, we should love each other, we should look out for each other. And then there are these things that are unacceptable in a marriage, that you shouldn't cheat on your partner, that you shouldn't tear them down, that you shouldn't abuse them in any way. But then there's this whole pile of acceptably unacceptable transgressions. Like, there are all the things that you're allowed to do as long as you don't ever mention them. So there's anger, and there's bitterness, and there's emotional withdrawalness. It's all there, but it's never talked about. So this couple, they keep up appearances while pushing down and never talking about their problems, because as soon as they start talking about them, there's going to be pain. It's going to hurt. So they push it down and they repress it, but everybody knows. Everybody knows. The kids know, the mom knows, the dad knows. Everybody knows, but nobody mentions it. However, the problem is that whatever pain you repress is still going to come out in dysfunctional ways. It comes out in children's behavior at school. It comes out in one person's over-attachment to the internet. It comes out in another person's overworking or over-drinking or whatever that looks like for them. Because whatever you push down will start to come out in unhealthy ways. But you're scared because if you bring stuff like this up, there's going to be pain. There's going to be hell to pay. That there's going to be massive arguments. That would be horrible. That would create a crisis. But what if? What if we've actually got it wrong? You see, we think that by bringing this stuff up to the surface and acknowledging it, that this will create a crisis. However, the truth is that the crisis already exists. It's just not being acknowledged. The crisis already exists. So the healthiest thing we can do is bring it up to the surface and deal with it. Or here's another example. Imagine the stereotypical example of the one elderly woman in church who, as soon as you start talking about changing the carpet, she's like, over my dead body, we are not changing the carpets. No way, that's never gonna happen. And everybody's like, don't you ever mention carpets in front of her. She's like your worst nightmare. She's your worst carpet nightmare. But for her, you see, it's not about the carpets. Right? It's about her husband, her dead husband. Or it's about a child that she lost or hasn't seen in years. Or it's about her being alone in a nursing home and nobody comes to visit her. You see, it's not about the carpet. That's the symptom that's coming out for not being able to bring something else to the surface. Because if people are willing to go to World War III over something so simple, it's not about something simple. That's just the symptom of something else that's not being talked about, that's being repressed. I actually think of these things that we repress as ghosts. Now what's a ghost? Well, basically, a ghost is the presence of something that appears to be absent. And so a ghost is made up of the stuff that we push down and repress in our relationships with others. So while most ghosts are not seen, they still are present. And they still have an impact on people's lives. Because we're all haunted houses. We're all full of ghosts. Every one of us. We're full of the people that we've hurt and the people who've hurt us. And the people that we love and the people that we've lost and the people that we'd like to be with and the people who have died that we never had a chance to say goodbye to. And it's not like the regular ghost stories where the reason why the ghosts are there is because they can't let go, they can't move on. No, the ghosts are there because we can't let go of them. And we deny it. We say that we're not full of ghosts, that everything's good. But the truth is, we repress all of this pain within us because we're afraid to deal with it. But it still comes out, sometimes in our dreams. Sometimes we have dreams so bad that we have to wake ourselves out of them. And sometimes this inner pain comes out in some pretty self-destructive ways. But here's the thing. These ghosts, if you keep them down, if you repress them long enough, they become poltergeists. And well, what do poltergeists do? Well, they break things. They're violent. They're abusive. They disrupt your life. They're unholy things. However, if you bring these ghosts to the surface, they become holy ghosts. They become the potential instruments for transformation. Remember earlier when I said that we're afraid to bring things to the surface because we think that that's going to create a crisis? Well, sometimes crisis is a gift. The word crisis literally means to sift, like a child who goes to the beach and they scoop up some sand and they watch it fall through their fingers, hoping that there's going to be some treasure left over. In the same way, that's what a crisis does. It comes into our life, and what we do is we just stand there and watch as everything falls away that we thought we needed, so that we can find out what's left over that can never be taken from us. And it just so happens that what's left over is exactly what we need for our own transformation. Now, once we start heading into crisis and stuff starts hitting the wall, we get scared. And the temptation is to try to suppress it and push down all that pain again. It's like pushing an easy button. You know those Staples commercials? Where the second anything gets a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit stressful, this big red easy button would pop out and somebody would press it, and then suddenly everybody is immediately transported to this pain-free, stress-free place where everything is wonderful. Well, the problem with transporting out of pain is that you miss all of the transformation. Because everything we need to become the people we were meant to be is actually inside that pain. We just need to be still and sit with it while it changes us. Because if we try to suppress it again, I think we end up like caterpillars who jump out of their chrysalis the second before they would have become butterflies. You see, sometimes pain can be our teacher. Pain comes to all of us. It just comes to all of our doors and knocks, and I think the wisest people in the world just open the door and say, "Come in, sit down, and don't leave until you've taught me what I need to know." But in order to allow pain to be our teacher, we have to believe that we can take it, that we can endure, that we're actually made, just like Jesus was, to walk right through our crucifixion to get to our resurrection, because that's the pattern for us as his followers. So much so that I think maybe we need to stop being afraid of pain and we need to start being afraid of easy buttons. Because I think that there are lots of misconceptions about pain, that pain is simply going to crush us and that we'll never recover. And this misconception about pain impacts us in lots of different ways, but none more so than parenting. And I get it. I totally get it. We want to do everything in our power, and I do mean everything in our power to prevent our kids from getting hurt. And I'm totally on board with this. And yet I want to tell you about a conversation I had a few weeks ago. And in this conversation, someone said to me, "My family is broken and I can't put it back together, and my son is in so much pain and it's killing me and I can't fix it. There's nothing I can do. And I feel like I just had this one job to protect this little boy from pain, and I couldn't do it. And I feel like such a failure." And I said, "Okay, let's just stop for a second. Now, could you give me 3 words to describe the kind of boy you're trying to raise? Like, just give me 3 words to describe who you want him to become." And she thought about it, and she said, "I want him to be kind, and I want him to be brave, and I want him to be wise." And I said, "Okay, what is it in a life that creates courage and wisdom and kindness?" It's struggle. And it's pain. And it's overcoming it again and again and again. So maybe, just maybe, it's possible that we feel like failures as parents because we have the wrong job description for parenthood. Because maybe when we're always shielding our kids from pain, maybe we're stealing from them the one thing that will help them become the people we dream they'll be. And in a way, this misconception about pain, it also affects our friendships and our relationships. Because what I have heard so often from people for whom the worst has happened, like either they've lost a child or they've lost a spouse through death or divorce, is that on top of that initial loss comes the second loss, in which they lose their friends one by one. Now, I've come to believe that it's not because their friends were bad people. It's just because their friends just didn't know what to do. Because if you ask them what happened, they'll say things like, I just didn't know what to say to make it better, or I just didn't know what to do to fix it. But anybody who is in deep pain or grief will tell you that they don't want their pain fixed. They don't want their grief taken away, because sometimes grief and pain is all they have left. Sometimes grief and pain is just the price we pay for deep love. It's the receipt that we hold up in the air as we say, look, I love deeply and I paid the price. And so the last thing somebody in pain wants is for you to come in and try to tidy it up. Because when we're in deep pain, we know that there's a door of hope on the peripheral, but we know it's there. It's just very important that we be the one to turn towards it. So what we need are friends who know how to be still, that don't feel so uncomfortable with pain that they feel like they have to tidy ours up, and that they can come in and sit next to us and say, this sucks, and I'm so sorry. And thank you for trusting me enough to come into your pain. Now, for some people, this sounds crazy. Like in our gospel, we're told that Jesus began to teach his disciples that he had to go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering, and that there he would be crucified, and on the third day he'd be raised. But for Peter, he couldn't wrap his head around anything good being achieved through suffering. And so he's like, no way, Lord, this must never happen to you. And Jesus looks at him and says, Peter, get out of the way. And he calls him Satan, which actually means an adversary, or one who's opposed to our plans. It means that in this moment, Peter is standing opposed to Jesus. Because what Jesus recognizes is that there is no transformation without pain. That there is no resurrection without that cross. And in his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul wrote about his troubles, hardships, distress, beatings, imprisonments, riots, sleepless nights, and hunger. Okay, and so this was a man who knew pain, right? And yet his pain doesn't lead him to despair. Instead, Paul claims that he and his friends are genuine yet regarded as impostors, known yet regarded as unknown, dying and yet they live on, beaten and yet not killed, sorrowful and yet always rejoicing, poor yet making many rich, having nothing and yet possessing everything. Having nothing and yet possessing everything. So what happens to us when we suffer is that I think we become open to the mercy and the grace and the gratitude and the gift and the appreciation and the joy that are always around us all the time. I remember earlier when I talked about crisis as a gift, and that the word crisis means to sift. And that what happens when we go through a crisis is that all the things we thought we needed are stripped away, so that all we're left with are actually the things we need for our own transformation. I think that what we discover going through a crisis is that there is a greatness within us. And that the things that can never be stripped away from us are the very things that that mother wished for her young boy. Courage, wisdom, and kindness. In our gospel, Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Now, I don't necessarily know what it looks like in your life to pick up your cross and follow Jesus towards your own crucifixion. But if I had to guess, I would say it means blowing the roof off of your haunted house and letting all of your ghosts rise to the surface so that you can face them. Now, that sounds hard and it sounds scary. But the message of our gospel is that when we take up our cross, there will be pain. But the good news is that the resurrection comes right behind it to bring us new life. And that young Polish man that I spoke about at the beginning, his name was Karl. But later in life, we knew him as Pope John Paul II. So may you, my brothers and sisters, may you discover that there is a greatness within you that will allow you not only to endure, but to be transformed by crisis. May you have the courage to face all of your ghosts, to carry your cross, and to be still in the midst of pain. And may you know the grace and peace of our God, which sustains you every day of your life. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.